Today, we are going to unpack one of the most famous promises ever written. It's a verse you've almost certainly heard, one that's often seen as this personal guarantee for a happy, prosperous life. Yeah, you know this one, right? It's on posters, it's in graduation cards, it's all over our social media feeds. And look, it's a message that brings a ton of comfort and hope. But here's the thing. To really understand the true power behind these words, we have to go back. We need to travel back to a world in total crisis, to a people who had literally lost just about everything. So our story kicks off around 594 BC, and it all revolves around a letter sent by the prophet Jeremiah. This wasn't just any letter, though. It was sent from the rubble of Jerusalem to a group of people who were now refugees, exiles in a strange new land. This timeline really sets the stage for us, and you've got to notice the timing here. Jeremiah's letter shows up after the first wave of exiles had already been forcibly marched from their home into the heart of the Babylonian Empire. This wasn't the end of their troubles, it was just getting started. And this was no random roundup of people. Oh no, Babylon's strategy was as brilliant as it was brutal. They performed what was basically a surgical strike, removing the entire leadership class. We're talking the royal family, government officials, military leaders, even the best craftsmen. The goal? To completely decapitate the nation and kill any hope of a future rebellion. Then the letter drops this absolute bombshell, a critical theological claim. Jeremiah writes that this whole disaster wasn't just about Babylon's military power. He says that God himself is taking responsibility, framing the exile as this incredibly painful but necessary act of divine discipline. Okay, so try to put yourself in their shoes. You're in exile. You're living in this climate of fear and just total uncertainty. You are desperate for some good news. And into that environment, you start hearing two completely different stories about what your future holds. And this lays out the conflict perfectly. On one side, you have these popular prophets who are selling easy, feel-good hope. They're basically saying, hey, don't worry about it. You'll be back home in just 2 years. But Jeremiah's message? It's the polar opposite. It's a harsh, unpopular, and incredibly difficult truth. So Jeremiah just calls it out. He directly confronts this dangerous misinformation, warning the exiles that the message that feels good to hear isn't always the one that's true. He's drawing a very clear, very hard line between popular opinion and what God is actually saying. All right, so if a quick rescue is off the table, what on earth were they supposed to do? What were the actual instructions from God that Jeremiah was passing along? And the commands were, well, they were absolutely shocking. They weren't told to sit around and wait for a rescue. They were told to build permanent lives, to plant gardens, get married, have kids, right there in the land of their enemy, to actually invest in the community that they were now forced to be a part of. But it's that third command that is just so radical, to seek the shalom of Babylon. Now, as you can see here, the Hebrew word shalom means so much more than just the absence of conflict. We're talking about complete well-being, prosperity, security, the flourishing of the whole community. And here's the revolutionary logic behind that command. Jeremiah says their own survival, their own shalom, was now directly tied to the prosperity of their captors. Think about that. By praying for Babylon, by working for its good, they were actually securing their own future. So if the plan wasn't a quick 2-year turnaround, what was the actual timeline for this hope and a future that God was promising? How long would they have to wait? Jeremiah gives a very specific, and I'm sure a very discouraging number: 70 years. 70. That's a full lifetime. Most of the adults hearing this letter would never, ever see their homeland again. And what's just incredible is how this 70-year period turned out to be remarkably accurate. It basically stretched from when Babylon first rose to power all the way until it fell to the Persian Empire, when King Cyrus the Great finally made a decree that allowed the Jewish exiles to go home. So now, with all that context, when we come back to this famous, beautiful promise, it just hits different, doesn't it? We can see now that this was never a promise for immediate comfort. So when we really re-examine it, what do we see? Well, first, it wasn't about a good day tomorrow for just one person. It was a promise for an entire community. Second, it was a long-term promise for their kids and their grandkids. It was hope that was delayed, for sure, but it was absolutely guaranteed. And it all depended on them being faithful for decades in exile. When you get right down to it, this ancient letter completely reframes what it even means to have hope, especially when you find yourself stuck in a long-term crisis that you just can't escape. So the huge takeaway here is this radical shift in thinking. It's about moving away from this desperate hope for an escape from your hardship and instead finding a real purpose and a deep meaning within that hardship. It's about endurance, it's about making a positive contribution, and it's about trusting in a bigger, longer story. And that, of course, leaves us with a pretty provocative question for our own lives, doesn't it? What does it look like for us to build a future, to seek peace, and to live with a profound hope right in the middle of our own personal and collective Babylons?